developers engaged, producing hundreds of apps and tens of thousands of pioneers, giving them feedback on these ideas. So through these, they have started building applications of various kinds. Like, for example, one vertical is remote labor. One example is the KYC app that we build, but another example is apps that are similar to Fiverr or Upwork, where a pioneer can provide some work and in exchange get paid in Pi from someone else. And that work could be from something simple as creating a piece of art to something more complex than this. Another vertical of applications that we see, we actually have several marketplaces on Pi. And these marketplaces, each one has slightly different angles. Some marketplaces are focusing on user-to-user good exchanges like eBay. Others are focusing on rallying up and connecting merchants around the world. And some are either even creating a decentralized network of logistics. So because Pi is in enclosed mainnet period right now, and you can't use Pi to use external FedEx or something like this, people have created this network of individuals who can help with delivery of goods. Other vertical is crowdsourcing tools. So for example, there is an app for creating polls, and someone who wants to get some feedback from community and they don't have a community, they can post a poll there and reward people in Pi for answering those questions that they may have. There is other apps such as quote production, funny quotes, good quotes, quality quotes. And there's, of course, games that are using Pi. For example, when you lose, you spend some Pi to continue, or we use Pi to buy virtual goods, cats and fertilizer or whatever the game has with Pi.
Yeah, so basically, overall, the application, in addition to the traditional, like blockchain-based kind of application like DeFi related, which Pi is capable of providing, especially after the open mainnet, we are also emphasizing utility or apps that facilitate access to true goods and services type of apps. And in addition to that, utility includes also entertainment or, social life. Like specifically on the social side applications, there are a bunch also coming from the community developers. But at the same time, we also are innovators of social applications. And we believe that the true Web3 social apps are not just moving from the Web 2 and putting things on chain and then become Web 3. Of course, that's one aspect, like the ownership aspect, like store things on chain, right? But we see far beyond that in the sense that we really want to build Web3 applications that actually make improvement of the flaws of Web 2. For example, authenticity, the fake news, misinformation, disinformation. For example, information silo, information overload. How do you find high signal information from a crowd of noises? Like these type of things, we think with the tool of cryptocurrency and token economics, designing the token economics of using cryptocurrency are able to facilitate the incentive and disincentive inside the social applications to regulate or moderate the behavior online and ultimately achieving better content, better curated content, and better signal content. At the same time, make people more accountable in their behavior. And actually, this is not something that we just the only idea. This idea has been with Pi since the last 3 or 4 years. But actually, recently, because our ecosystem reached the point that we are actually about to launch some of our applications that is an instantiation of such ideas I just described. So we're actually excited very soon. Some of these apps of ours will actually be released.
And I want to mention that one of the reasons why we can actually do that at Pi is because of the large number of people on the network. So if certain social networking apps or certain apps that we are describing just now, they only start making sense when you have a large number of people. And the utility is much lower when you haven't reached the critical mass.
Yeah, I was going to point that same thing out. I mean, you can't have a Fiverr clone on chain without like couple million people, because then you just don't have diversity enough to get the tasks. It's the chicken and egg problem. So these marketplace type applications make a ton of sense. One thing you brought up, it was like very quick thing you said, but the thing about information silos, like data silos, this is one of the things that from back in 2017, when they were talking about token curated registries all the time, I was really interested in. There's lots of different data silos. I was just talking to a friend actually yesterday about how he works for a nonprofit that their whole job is to get researchers to open up their databases for collaborative, like open data, open science. And their issue is it's a social problem. They want to get credit and be the first to produce the final work of the research with that data. And so like researchers are just not incentivized to open up their databases. And I agree, like it'd be so cool to find like a token economic approach to solve that problem, because like I'm an open source zealot, by the way, if you didn't know that about me. Like I love open source technology. It's like the only thing I'll ever build is open source software, because I care about the impact that it can have. And I think that you can have the maximum impact with software if it's open source. And especially if you weave in like decentralized technologies and token economics, all of a sudden there's like an economic reason to do it too. That's maybe in theory more sustainable than the way things were before. And I think the other thing I wanted to say too is I liked the way that you framed the transition from Web 2 is just like taking an existing thing and making it better, not just completely getting rid of it. And I think that's an important point to make. We're getting towards the top of the show here, and I always ask this last question. What have I not asked you guys that you wanted to talk about? What's the thing I should have asked that I didn't ask yet?
Good question.
You want to talk about PiOS?
Sure, we can talk about PiOS.
So since you mentioned open source, we recently launched our own open source license agreement. It's called PiOS. This allows developers to get help from other developers and collaborate when they're producing Pi applications. We saw a lot of adoption, and we saw that it was even helpful in hackathons. So we recently had a hackathon, and that resulted in several PiOS applications that were built. And the good thing about it is that in the end of the hackathon, before we start the next one, there is a code base that even if half of those applications end up the developers not continuing, who knows, but the next set of developers can potentially start from that code and make some use of it.
I've seen a few people in our space create their own licenses. I typically go with the AGPL v3 license, just mainly because my business partner helped write it back in the day. And I like that it ensures that the things that I work on, I'm not an engineer myself, but as an entrepreneur, I'm helping get these things built, that they'll always be free and open source. Like I like that license. I lean like very copy left. What is in your license? Like how is it written? Like what are the benefits of the license? I'd love to read it too. If you can send me the license, I would love to read it. But just like the high level for people, like what does your license mean and what are the implications of using it?
It started by prototyping after the MIT license and has some components inside that are emphasizing collaboration within the Pi network.
Yeah, so it facilitates, building inside the network with one each other, while at the same time protects the network itself as well. So it's a Pi network specific, OS license. That's why it's PiOS, and they facilitate within the network contributions to create applications, one on top of
what protections is it providing to the network? What are you guys protecting the network from?
Basically, for example, preventing of just a complete copy of this network's applications to completely just migrate to another network, for example. It's exclusively within the network.
This enabled a bunch of developers who otherwise wouldn't be sharing their code to feel more comfortable to actually share the code. We find conversations when we're giving grants or when we're discussing with teams of whether they are willing to license their code under PiOS, we find them much easier to result into actually people making
it's interesting. I mean, I've had this conversation with so many entrepreneurs and developers, who have a lot of fear and anxiety around open source. Like just something as simple as like, how do I do it? Like I want to open source and I don't know what license, but assume I know what license I'm going to use. How do I do it? And I'm always like, you just put it in your repo. Like you just make it open source. It's really easy. There is a lot of philosophical conversation around the different licenses and like the protections they provide, and totally get where the people in your ecosystem who are building these applications are coming from and where you're coming from. My philosophy has always been, and I might be wrong, I've kind of got this experiment going at this company I'm building called Olaplex, and I'll tell you guys more about that later. It's not for the show, but it's 100% like full stack GPL licensed. And my thesis is that by being that way, anybody can fork it and do whatever they want with it, but all the things that they do to improve it will come back. And like, if we can take advantage of those at my company, then we will, if that's something that we can use. And that really the only way we win as a business is by being open and collaborating with as many people as possible, and then out competing them on like BD and sales and marketing, right? Just getting after it on like acquiring customers. And that as we build those network effects with partnerships and customers, even if you carbon copy my software, it becomes really hard to compete against us. And like even SaaS businesses that are closed source, we saw this all through the 2000s when SaaS became like a huge thing. Even if you have a closed source software, like someone can come and out execute you and just copy the whole business, even if they don't have your source code. And so for something like Pi, I mean, you guys have built a massive network. It's almost impossible to replicate that part. The network, the software that runs Pi could be 100% open source, and no one could, I mean, I could copy it. I could figure out how to copy it, but like no one's going to use it. It's like crickets and tumbleweed when I launch it. I could go on about this topic like all day. It's not worth getting like too into the weeds.
I can see you're very interested in this.
You mentioned like there's some really exciting applications that are launching, and I didn't want to leave that one hanging. Like, do you want to say what some of them are to like leak some alpha to people who are listening?
Actually, it's still stealth, so we will, wait. Maybe soon it will be released soon. Yes. Okay.
All right. You can leave us hanging. We will pay attention to Twitter and wait for the announcements. Thanks so much for being on the show, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Nice talking to you. Bye-bye.
Subscribe to our Pi Whales YouTube channel and earn Pi rewards.